The first light of dawn finds Thomas already awake on his straw-filled pallet. In the smoky one-room hut he calls home, the air is cool and dim. A few embers still glow in the central hearth, carefully banked under ashes the night before so that the fire never truly dies. Thomas's wife, Alice, stirs beside him, and from a corner comes the soft lowing of their cow, penned within the house for safety. Like most peasants, they share their home with their animals at night. The cow, a nanny goat, and a couple of clucking hens roosting on a beam, a necessary arrangement to protect the beasts from wolves or thieves in the darkness. As Thomas sits up, the rustle of straw and the scratch of flea bites remind him of the realities of peasant life. The dirt floor beneath him is covered in old, flattened rushes and straw that only partially soften its hardness. The walls of the hut are wattle and daub, wooden poles crisscrossed and smeared with mud, straw and even animal dung to insulate against drafts. There are no glass windows. Indeed, there are hardly windows at all, just a couple of small openings covered by a wooden shutter and a threadbare cloth. Dawn's first grey light creeps through these cracks as Thomas pushes aside the old woolen cloak serving as a door. Outside, a rooster crows to signal the new day. Thomas crosses himself and murmurs a brief prayer of thanks for the morning. He was taught from childhood that every day is a gift from God, and starting it with prayer is as routine as breathing. His joints ache slightly from yesterday's labours. At 30 years old, he is strong, but already feels the burden of a life of toil. In the faint light, he grabs his work clothes, a rough linen shirt and woolen tunic, coloured a dull brownish grey from undyed yarn. Like most peasants, he owns only a couple of outfits, one for everyday work and one marginally nicer for Sunday church or holy days. His work tunic is patched at the elbows. He pulls on coarse wool trousers and ties them at the waist with a leather belt. His feet slide into worn leather shoes, the kind that lace around the ankles. They are caked with old mud from the fields. Alice, already up, covers her simple shift with a sleeveless wool dress and ties a kerchief over her hair. Even at this early hour, she has work to do. The first task is to tend to their animals. Thomas leads the cow and goat outside into the pale morning, tying them to a post near what little grass can be found by the roadside. He scoops a bucket of feed for the hog that slept in a pen attached to the hut. Not far off, he can hear other villagers doing the same, faint calls and clucks as animals are led out after the long night indoors. A neighbour's child drives a gaggle of geese out of a shed, honking in protest. The village is coming alive. By now, the eastern sky has turned from grey to a delicate pink. Alice has taken their wooden bucket, pungent from its overnight use as a chamber pot, and walks toward the stream to empty it. There is no well in this tiny hamlet, so each morning the women fetch water from the brook that flows past the village. Thomas uses this moment of quiet to rekindle the fire. Kneeling, he gently blows on the glowing coals in the hearth pit and feeds them dry kindling. Soon, little flames leap up, and a familiar haze of smoke begins to fill the hut. With no chimney in their home, the smoke will escape slowly through the thatch and wall cracks, leaving a sooty film on everything. Thomas coughs lightly. The smoky air is something he is long used to, and paradoxically, it helps keep the fleas at bay. Alice returns with fresh water, and together they break their fast. Breakfast is simple. Leftover barley bread from yesterday, hard and dark with bits of bran. Thomas softens his chunk of bread by dunking it into a wooden cup of small ale, a weak beer safer to drink than water. Alice feeds the children a thin vegetable pottage, essentially a watered-down stew of peas and onions from their garden. The pottage was cooked last night in a blackened clay pot over the fire and kept warm by the embers overnight. It isn't much, but it fills their stomachs just enough to face the long day ahead. They savour what they have. Meat is a rarity reserved for holy days or the whims of the Lord, and butter is scarce. They usually cook with lard, rendered from the last pig slaughter. As Thomas chews, he daydreams briefly of sweet butter or a bit of salted herring, but those luxuries are seldom on his table. Still, the coarse bread and pottage provide energy for the labour to come, and he washes it down with a final swig of ale. Outside, the light grows stronger. The sun has not yet cleared the horizon, but Thomas can delay no longer. In summertime, a peasant's workday often begins as early as 3 or 4 in the morning and continues until dusk. Today will be no exception. He takes up his tools, a wooden rake and a sickle with an iron blade. The sickle's edge is sharp. He had sat by the hearth last night honing it on a stone in preparation. It will be needed for the harvest work in the Lord's fields. Slinging a leather flask of watered ale over his shoulder and adjusting his cap, Thomas steps out into the dawn to begin his labours. In the rosy glow of sunrise, Thomas joins a small band of fellow villagers trudging down the dirt road toward the fields. The village consists of a dozen huts like Thomas's clustered together, with fields radiating out around them in long strips. Each family has a few strips of land to farm, scattered among the large open fields, a patchwork that ensures everyone shares both the good soil and the poorer ground. This week, however, much of Thomas's labour is owed to the Lord of the Manor. It is late summer in the 14th century, the season of the grain harvest, and the local lord expects his peasants to reap the crops on the demesne, the lord's own portion of land, before they attend to their own plots. Thomas, as a villain bound to the lord's land, has no choice but to comply. The feudal obligation is clear. In exchange for the meagre strip of land he is allowed to farm for his family, he must give his lord a hefty share of his harvest and several days of unpaid labour. And so, like his father before him, Thomas shoulders his tools and heads to the Lord's fields as the day begins. They reach the wheat fields, which spread golden and tall under the early sun. Already a few of the Lord's hired men, the reaper men, are at work, but much of the task relies on the peasant's own sweat. With little fanfare, Thomas sets to work. He ties a strip of cloth around his head to keep the sweat and his overlong brown hair out of his eyes, then grasps the first clump of ripe wheat in one hand and swings his sickle with the other. Swish, crunch, the curved blade saws through the stalks and he tosses the cut wheat behind him in a pile. Step, grab, swing, toss. The motions repeat with the rhythm of long practice. Beside him, old Matthew, a grandfather of the village, works more slowly, his back permanently stooped from decades of reaping. Not far away, young Will, barely 14, but already expected to pull his weight, is zealously hacking at the stalks, trying to prove himself. A reeve, the Lord's field overseer, one of the peasants appointed to manage others, watches the line of workers, occasionally barking an order to hurry along. The sun climbs, burning off the morning mist and beginning to warm the land. By mid-morning, Thomas's shoulders are aching from the constant stooping and cutting. Harvesting grain is brutally hard on the lower back. One must stay bent for hours to reach the base of the stalks. Thomas straightens up for a moment to stretch out a cramp. He wipes sweat from his brow with a sleeve, leaving a streak of dust on his face. The harvested wheat must be gathered and tied into sheaves. A few women and older children follow behind the cutters to bundle the stalks. Thomas spots Alice among them. After seeing to the children and finishing her own morning chores, she has come to the fields with a basket in hand. She and the other women will glean behind the reapers, collecting stray stalks and gathering whatever wheat heads may have fallen to ensure nothing is wasted. Their toddler, little Joan, toddles at Alice's side, perhaps too young to work but too attached to her mother to stay at home. Alice has brought along a piece of bread and an onion for Thomas to eat when the time comes, as well as a jug of diluted ale to keep him hydrated. Seeing his wife labouring as well, Thomas feels a mix of gratitude and worry. Women in the village truly work as much as men, toiling in the fields when needed, on top of caring for home and children. He knows Alice will return home in a few hours to tend to their midday meal, then likely spin wool or mend clothes in whatever scant free time the afternoon affords her. For now, though, she flashes him a brief smile across the field and continues gathering wheat. The work resumes in earnest. Thomas falls into the age-old rhythm alongside his neighbours. The swish of sickles through grain and the rustle of cut stalks accompany their laboured breathing. An occasional joke or bit of gossip passes between the workers when the reeve is out of earshot. They talk of simple things, whose cow is calving, the prospects of this year's harvest, or the news that a peddler came through the nearby market town with exotic dried fish from the coast. For a moment, the men even chuckle when old Matthew quips that he'd trade all the wheat in the field for a single slice of bacon. Salted meat is so scarce that the mere idea is humorous. Thomas laughs along, though he cannot remember the last time he tasted bacon himself. Likely at Easter, when each family killed a pig and shared a portion with the whole village in celebration. As the sun nears its zenith, the peasants' shadows shrink. The heat of late morning is oppressive. Even the buzzing flies seem to slow in the thick, warm air. Thomas's stomach growls, reminding him of the simple breakfast long since burned away by exertion. Thankfully, the reeve finally grants them a short rest. It is not generosity on the overseer's part so much as necessity. Overheated, exhausted labourers could collapse and be of no use to anyone. So Thomas and his fellow peasants retreat to the edge of the field, where a lone oak tree offers a patch of shade. He sinks to the ground with a groan of relief, feeling the coolness of grass for a blessed moment. Beneath the oak, the peasants take their meagre lunch. Alice has left a bit of food with Thomas, a heel of yesterday's rye bread and a small lump of cheese wrapped in cloth. Gratefully, he shares the morsels with young Will, who had no family member to bring him food. The dark rye bread is coarse and hard. Each bite requires effort, but it's filling. The cheese, made from skimmed milk Alice set to curdle a few days ago, is mild but nourishing. Thomas washes it down with a gulp of the warm ale from his flask. Around him, others crunch on raw onions or nibble on dried peas. A few fortunate ones have some garlic or radishes to add flavour. This is the common fare of the fields, simple foods that come from their own gardens and labour. Meat is virtually absent. None here would dream of slicing into the salted pork hanging in their cottage, except on the most special of feast days. Many a day Thomas's noontime meal is identical to his morning one. Bread, pottage, or whatever the garden yields. It must sustain him through the day's second half of hard work. As they eat, conversation sparks among the resting workers. They speak in the broad dialect of their shire, filled with homely expressions and occasional oaths invoking saints. One man complains about the heavy tithe that will be due to the church come harvest's end. 10% of all their grain will have to be given away. Father Gregor will have his granary full while our children go hungry, the man grumbles under his breath. Others nod in agreement. The yearly tithe to support the parish church is indeed a burden, made worse by the knowledge that failing to pay it is not only illegal, but also a sin in the eyes of the church. Thomas listens quietly. He shares the sentiment, but he's cautious about criticising the church too openly. They have all been taught that God sees their devotion or lack thereof and will punish those who shirk their duty to him. So Thomas adds diplomatically, "At least the Lord and the saints will bless us for our offering." Old Matthew, sitting with his back against the oak trunk, uses the pause to tell a story to the younger lads. Matthew has a gift for spinning tales, and soon even the weary are listening. He recalls a local legend of the Woman of the Wood, a spirit said to guard the nearby forest. In a low, dramatic tone, he recounts how years ago a peasant who tried to cut too many trees from the Lord's forest without permission got lost under a strange enchantment. Lights led him astray, and whispers in the shadows frightened him so badly that he ran all night, only finding his way home at dawn. Some say it was fairies, Matthew says with a wink. Others say it was the spirit of the old pagan goddess of the forest. Either way, mind you respect the woods. The listeners chuckle. They live in a world where Christian faith is strong, but old folk beliefs still linger in whispers and tales told by the fireside. Thomas smiles, recognizing the mix of superstition and moral lesson in the tale, a warning against stealing wood, which, after all, is a punishable offence under the Lord's laws, wrapped in a ghost story. For a few precious minutes in the shade of the oak, they almost forget the brutal work waiting for them. A cooling breeze wafts by, and one of the women leads everyone in a short prayer of gratitude, a habit ingrained by years of piety and hardship. They bow their heads as she voices thanks to God for the food and asks for strength to finish the day's labor. Thomas murmurs, "Amen," and crosses himself, feeling a spiritual solidarity with his neighbors. Their lives are hard, but faith and community bind them together in hope. All too soon, the reeve's sharp voice cuts through the tranquility. Break time is over. The men groan to their feet, muscles protesting after the brief rest. Thomas gulps one last mouthful of ale from his flask to wet his throat, then returns to the rows of golden wheat. Overhead, the church bell from the village chapel begins to toll the noontime angelus, 3 slow peals that carry across the fields. Many of the peasants pause and cross themselves again, offering a quick, silent prayer to the Virgin Mary as the tradition dictates at midday. The sound of the bell is a comfort. It is as much a part of their daily rhythm as the sunrise and sunset. The afternoon sun glares bright and unyielding. By early afternoon, heat shimmers over the open fields. Thomas's tunic is drenched in sweat sticking to his back, and his head wrap is soaked. Flies buzz incessantly around his face, drawn by the sweat and the sweet smell of cut grain. Each time he swings the sickle, bits of chaff and dust rise and stick to his damp skin. His hands are starting to blister despite his leathery palms. Yet he continues with grim determination. A peasant's life is a constant race against nature's clock. The harvest must be completed in time, or the weather could ruin what stands. Over the years, Thomas has learned that persistence is as crucial as strength. He forces himself into a steady pace, not as fast as the morning, but relentless and even. Around him is a flurry of coordinated activity. Several villagers have begun binding the cut wheat into sheaves using twisted straw ropes. Piles of gathered sheaves grow, dotting the field. Once a section is completely reaped, Thomas and a couple of others hoist the sheaves into a wain, a large ox-drawn cart, to be taken to the Lord's barn for threshing. The cart's wooden wheels creak under the weight. Thomas heaves a heavy sheaf up, muscles straining. His eldest son, who is only 10 but already helping in small ways, tries to assist by pushing at the base of the stack. Thomas gives him an encouraging nod and a rare smile. He feels a flicker of pride to see the boy learning the work of men. As the cart lumbers off, guided by the reeve and a driver urging the ox forward, Thomas returns to the remaining stand of grain. A sudden yelp catches his attention. One of the younger women has sliced her hand with a sickle. Bright blood drips from a gashed palm. She hisses in pain, and immediately a few workers cluster around to help. Alice is among them. She tears a strip from her apron and wraps the wound tightly. Thomas winces in sympathy. Such accidents are common and can be dangerous. A deep cut without proper care might fester. They all know of people who lost limbs or lives to infection from simple wounds. But in this moment, practicality rules. The injured woman, face pale, is escorted to rest under a tree, and the work continues. There is no physician to call. Perhaps the village wise woman will apply an herbal poultice later. For now, the harvest cannot halt. Thomas offers a quick prayer under his breath for the woman's healing as he goes on. The sun beats down like a hammer. He thinks longingly of the small stream beyond the fields. How nice it would be to dunk his head in its cool water, but leaving one's post is not allowed, except at designated breaks. The memory of last year's harvest comes to mind. Heavy rains arrived suddenly one afternoon, soaking the cut wheat and causing some to sprout or rot before it could be collected. The entire village had lost a portion of their crop. That loss meant a hungry winter for many. Thomas remembers how his family's bread had to be stretched thinner and how they boiled nettles and foraged acorns to make up meals when the grain ran low. He will not forget the ache of an empty belly, nor the sound of his children crying from hunger. So he endures the discomfort and pushes on, determined that this year not a single stalk will be lost on his account. By late afternoon, the work on the Lord's wheat field is finally done. The last sheaf is loaded and the ox cart makes a final trip to the barn. A sense of weary accomplishment hangs in the air. Under the sun's westward gaze, the harvested field lies shorn and stubbly, dotted with only a few missed stalks that the gleaners now hurriedly pick. Thomas straightens his back and stretches slowly, feeling each vertebra complain. His shirt is utterly soaked, and his arms speckled with tiny cuts from the rough wheat and sickle blade. Dust clings to his hair and eyebrows, but the day's hardest task is complete. He allows himself a small smile of relief which he shares with Will and old Matthew. Matthew claps a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "We'll sleep well tonight," the old man chuckles. Thomas nods in agreement, too tired to laugh. However, Thomas's day is far from over. Though the back-breaking harvest in the domain is done for now, he still must tend to his own family's needs before night falls. The group of peasants disperses, as some head to tend their own strips of field or personal gardens while the light lasts, and others to fetch their grazing animals from the common pasture. Thomas decides to check on the small half-acre he and Alice cultivate for their own food. It lies on the way back to the village. He finds his strip of land where a mix of rye and oats is growing and notes thankfully that it won't be ready to harvest for another week or so. The grains are still a bit green, a blessing in disguise, as it allowed him to devote these days to the Lord's fields. Bending down among the rows of oats, he pulls up a few persistent weeds that threaten to choke the crops. He also inspects the peas and beans growing on the edges. The pods are filling out well. With a calloused thumb, Thomas rubs at a leaf to check for pests. Last year, a swarm of locusts devastated the bean crop in a neighboring village, and rumors of insect blights always make him anxious. But today, all seems in order. Satisfied, he offers another quick prayer, this one of petition. God and Saint Fiacre, keep our crops safe and bountiful, invoking the patron saint of gardeners, as he often does. On the walk home, Thomas's eldest son runs ahead, chasing a stray chicken that escaped its pen. Alice has remained in the field to finish gleaning and will come later with others. So Thomas walks with his boy, leading their cow and goat back from the post where they had grazed through the day. The sun hangs low and golden now, casting long shadows of man and beast across the dusty road. Other villagers converge similarly, a pair of brothers herding a flock of sheep, an old woman carrying a basket of turnips from the garden, children lugging bundles of firewood gathered from the woods. Everyone is coated in the day's grime and exhaustion. Yet, as the work winds down, a gentle camaraderie replaces the earlier urgency. Neighbors greet each other with tired smiles. A successful day's harvest for the Lord means indirectly security for the community and avoidance of the Lord's displeasure. Despite sore muscles and sunburnt necks, they share a collective pride in having done what must be done. At the entrance to the village, just by the small thatched church, the bailiff, the Lord's steward, awaits on horseback. He is here to make a tally of the day's yield. The peasants dutifully report the number of cartloads harvested. The bailiff, a stern man with a feathered cap, nods curtly, reminding them all that the Lord expects the same diligence when it's time to bring in their own crops, upon which the Lord will levy his rent and dues. Thomas listens silently, head bowed. He feels no love for this man who represents taxes and demands, but open defiance is unthinkable. The feudal laws are clear and harsh. In his lifetime, Thomas has seen what happens if a peasant refuses their obligations: fines, public punishments, or worse. Just a generation ago, after a poor harvest, a desperate neighbour had been caught poaching a deer from the Lord's forest. The Lord's men hanged him as a thief, making an example that none have forgotten. Thomas still shudders at the memory of the swinging body by the roadside. No, he will not risk the wrath of his Lord or the law. He forces himself to be content with small mercies. Today, at least, no one incurred the bailiff's anger, and the work was done without mishap beyond the one cut hand. As the bailiff departs, the village bell rings out again, this time for vespers, the evening prayer. The sun kisses the horizon, bathing the sky in hues of orange and pink. It is the signal that the labour of the day is concluding. Many villagers will stop by the church to offer evening prayers of thanks. Thomas, leading his cow with one hand and carrying a bundle of bean vines with the other, pauses within earshot of the little wooden chapel. The sound of the Hail Mary being chanted drifts out. For a moment he considers joining the prayers, but exhaustion tugs at him. Instead, he whispers his own simple thanks to God for getting him through another day, and continues on his way home, eager for rest. Back at the hut, the familiar smells of home embrace Thomas: wood smoke, sweat, and the earthy scent of packed dirt floors. The children are already there, the older ones seeing to the younger. His second son, only 5, is trying to coax the family's hen to her nest, while little Joan, the toddler, clings to her big sister's skirt. Thomas ties the cow in its corner of the hut and refills the goat's water dish. The animals settle in with soft grunts and rustling. They seem to know it's the end of the day. Alice arrived not long after, carrying a small sack of gleaned wheat and a handful of wild herbs she picked on the walk back. Her face is flushed and tired. Without words, Thomas and Alice share a look of mutual accomplishment and fatigue. They survived another hard day. Dinner must be prepared, and though weary, Alice sets to it at once, with Thomas helping as he can. He rakes the fire, adding a few pieces of dried peat and wood to build up the flames. Alice pours water into the iron pot hanging over the hearth and begins to add ingredients for pottage, the staple evening meal. From a clay jar, she takes a scoop of barley, precious grains from their stored supply, and tosses it into the boiling water. Next, she adds some chopped cabbage and turnips from the garden plot behind the house. A couple of peas and beans go in as well, though most of those will be saved to dry for winter storage. She plucks a few leaves off the wild herbs, nettle and parsley, and drops them in for flavour. The potage is thin, but at least tonight they have a bit of flavouring. Alice splurges by stirring in a small dollop of bacon drippings, saved from a long-gone slab of bacon. The greasy drop of fat will lend a meaty taste to the soup. As the mixture simmers, a savoury, if somewhat pungent smell fills the hut. It mingles with the less pleasant odours of the day: unwashed bodies, wet wool, and the animals. But such is the perfume of peasant life. While the stew cooks, Thomas takes a moment to remove his sweat-soaked tunic and hang it on a peg near the fire to dry. He wears just his long linen shirt now, which reaches his thighs. In the warm months, many peasants go bare-legged at home, as Thomas does now, letting the fire's heat begin to dry the sweat on his skin. He pours a small basin of water and quickly washes his face and hands, scrubbing off the dirt. Full bathing is out of the question. It's inconvenient, and frankly, most villagers believe too much bathing could make one sick. In fact, it's often jested that peasants bathe only twice in life, once at birth and once after death. Thomas has no intention of proving otherwise tonight. The rinsing will do well enough. They gather to eat on low stools around the hearth. The hut is dark beyond the circle of firelight. Night has fallen fully, and without windows or lamps, only the fire illuminates their meal. A single tallow candle is lit, and set on the small wooden table, but its flame flickers and sputters, giving off more smell than light. The candle is made from animal fat and emits a greasy, pungent odor as it burns, but they use it sparingly. Such candles are a luxury they make at home only occasionally, from kitchen drippings. Usually, the fire alone is their light. Thomas ladles the thickened pottage into coarse pottery bowls. Each family member also gets a slice of barley bread. They use the bread to sop up the stew, eating with their fingers and wooden spoons. Around the fire, the children's eyes gleam with hunger as they blow on the hot broth and slurp eagerly. It might not be a grand feast, but after a day of labor, it tastes divine to Thomas. The warm stew fills the hollow in his belly. He chews on a piece of cabbage and barley, savouring the hint of smoky bacon flavour that Alice's careful thrift provided. As they eat, the family shares a quiet conversation. The children prattle about small happenings, a lost chicken found, a game they played with pebbles outside. Thomas listens, smiling faintly as his eldest daughter mimics the stern voice of the reeve scolding a lazy worker, drawing laughter from her siblings. Laughter is a balm. Even Alice, exhausted, lets out a gentle chuckle. Thomas then tells them about old Matthew's tale of the woman of the wood, told at midday. The children's eyes widen at the mention of fairies and forest spirits. To reassure them, and perhaps to reinforce the lesson, Alice chimes in that it's always wise to come home before dark, and to never take more from the forest than one should. Advice, both practical and, in their world, tinged with the supernatural.
When the bowls are empty, Thomas feels the deep ache of fatigue setting in.
His body is begging for rest, but a few chores remain before they can retire. Alice takes the gleaned wheat she collected and spreads it on a cloth near the hearth to dry. Tomorrow she'll winnow and grind some of it to add to their flour. Thomas tends to his tools by the firelight, inspecting the sickle's blade that got such heavy use today. He uses a bit of sand to clean off the sap and grit, then carefully wraps the blade in oiled cloth to prevent rust. These tools are humble, but they are as valuable to him as a knight's sword. Without them he could not do his work. He leans the rake and hoe in a corner, making a mental note that he'll need to repair the rake's handle soon. It's starting to splinter. In one corner of the hut, Alice has settled on a stool with a basket of wool. By touch and memory she spins flax and wool fibres on her drop spindle, her hands working the thread even as her eyes droop. The rhythmic twisting of the weighted spindle and the soft whir as it turns are familiar evening sounds. By spinning, she creates yarn that later she might weave or knit into clothing for the family. Nearly everything they wear they must produce by their own labour. Homespun wool for garments, leather they tan for shoes, linen from flax for shirts. Peasant life leaves no idle hands. Even the evenings are filled with domestic industry. Thomas's eldest son is responsible for one last task tonight, taking the family's turn at guarding the village's common livestock pen. The village maintains a penned area for sheep and cows that belong collectively or to the Lord, and each household's men or boys take turns ensuring no predators or thieves disturb the animals at night. It is a duty taken seriously. A wolf among the flock can be devastating, and the howls of wolves are not unheard in these parts. The boy looks a bit nervous. It will be his first night doing this alone. But Thomas claps him on the shoulder encouragingly. "Keep the fire going and you'll be fine," he advises, handing his son a stout stick as a club. Inside, Thomas prays quietly for the boy's safety and courage. He knows the terror the dark countryside can inspire in a young heart. Before the boy leaves, Alice slips a protective charm into his hand, a small wooden cross carved by the village priest and blessed last Easter. In a world where danger lurks in the dark, both human faith and little superstitions provide comfort.
With the older boy off on his duty and the other children already dozing on the straw mat,
Thomas and Alice prepare for bed. The fire is banked one final time, embers pushed together and covered so that it will smoulder through the night. keeping some warmth in the home. The lone candle is snuffed out to save what remains of it for another night. In the darkness, the hut is lit only by faint red hints of the hearth. Thomas helps his wife spread out the family's bedding, simple hay and straw-filled mattresses that they lay on the floor. They pull a patched wool blanket over themselves and the smallest children, who cuddle in with them for warmth. Privacy is non-existent. The whole family sleeps side by side, and even the cow's gentle chewing and the goat's occasional bleat are part of the night's lullaby. In the stillness of the night, the village is quiet but for the occasional bark of a distant dog or the hoot of an owl. Thomas lies on his back, staring up at the dark thatch above, barely visible. His body is utterly spent. Every muscle seems to throb with soreness now that he is still. Yet his mind wanders before sleep takes him. He reflects on the day. A successful day, all told. The Lord's wheat is in without calamity. His family is fed for the night, if not lavishly, at least adequately. The children are asleep, safe under their roof. That in itself is a blessing in these times when so much can go wrong. Thomas's hand subconsciously finds the wooden cross he wears on a cord around his neck. Fingering it, he silently thanks God for protecting them today. Hardship is a constant companion, nasty, brutish, and short life may be, as the priest often reminds them in sermons, but small joys and mercies abound too. He recalls little Joan's laughter, the taste of warm bread, the sunset's beauty, and the camaraderie of neighbours. These are the humble riches of a peasant's life. His thoughts drift to those they have lost. In the darkness, his eyes well up unexpectedly as he remembers the tiny grave of their infant son in the churchyard. The baby had not survived the last winter, one of the many children taken by illness before their first year of life. Nearly half of all children never reach adulthood in their village, a cruel reality that Thomas knows too well. He whispers a soft prayer for the boy's soul, imagining for a moment that the child is an angel in heaven watching over them. Alice, sensing his sorrow even half asleep, reaches over and squeezes Thomas's hand. They exchange a brief, understanding glance in the dark. Shared grief, like everything else, is born together. From somewhere outside comes a lone wolf's howl. It echoes over the fields. Thomas tenses, but then remembers his son at the livestock pen, hopefully tending a fire to keep such predators at bay. He trusts the other men on duty will help if needed. Still, he cannot help but worry a little until the night falls silent again. He knows too that on some nights, bandits or armed men could pose a danger, but their village is small and far from the main roads, usually spared from strife. Only once, years ago, had armed brigands raided the hamlet, and that memory still haunts the older folk. Tonight, however, there is peace. Within the hut, the cow shuffles on its tether, then settles. The coals in the hearth crackle softly under their blanket of ash. Thomas feels the heaviness of sleep finally descend, like a gentle tide over his consciousness. Just before he succumbs, he makes one last sign of the cross and murmurs, "In manus tuas, Domine," into your hands, Lord, the beginning of a night prayer, entrusting his soul to God until morning. Alice echoes a quiet Amen. In this way, every day of their lives ends, with faith that they will see the dawn. Thus, Thomas the peasant drifts into deep sleep, his exhausted body claiming its due rest. Outside, the stars wheel over the medieval village, and the world remains oblivious to the dreams and struggles of the lowborn. Yet, in his own way, Thomas has been the hero of this day, conquering fatigue, hunger, and hardship with perseverance and hope. As the embers glow and fade, the village lies in darkness, awaiting the cock's crow. In a few short hours, Thomas will rise again with the first light to repeat the cycle, another day of toil and faith. Another chapter in the quiet, unsung epic of the medieval peasant. His life may be humble, but it is the backbone of his world. And with that thought unwittingly in mind, he sleeps soundly until the dawn calls him once more to work.